Welcome back to the podcast. It's your host, John Scardina. I am so excited for this episode. It is a collaboration with Disaster Tough Podcast and the now famous Zach Borst of EM Weekly. Zach, welcome to the show.
John, welcome to the show. Also, because I'm going to also air this show.
Hey, that's fine. That's great. I think it's kind of fun to do these collaborations between our podcasts because it's an opportunity for more people to hear different types of content and listener styles or speaker styles, and just kind of grow that whole thing that we're trying to do with like the Readiness Lab of like creating a community. So it's always fun to see on here and to do these collabs.
Yeah, no, it's been a minute. I don't think we've done an episode since I don't know, it was like sometime. I was going to say last semester, but I think it's season is the word I'm looking for.
Disaster class is in session.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last semester. The funny enough, I got a lot of comments about being on your show from some of my listeners about my after actions of IAEM.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, one, I wish I knew who he was, and I apologize for not recalling the name right now. But he sent me a lot of comments on LinkedIn through a DM about what his thoughts were. And he was, I believe, a regional president. Is that what you guys call him?
I think so, yeah.
Regional president on the East Coast. And so just hats off to you, for sending that over, listener, and telling what your thoughts are. And I appreciate that. I have a perspective, and other people love IAEM. And I definitely had a good time when I was out there. Despite having some different perspectives. So I thought, hey, it just shows that these collaborations can really help foster conversations.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. No, I think that was good too, because it was like kind of the first IEM where I think a lot of people had gone back to in person. And so that was like a fresh start. So it's actually probably good for them to also hear like a little bit more honest feedback. Like the people that typically give feedback online, it's like you either love it or you hate it. And there's almost no like middle ground. So if you can just have a conversation. Yeah, exactly. So I think it was good to just to have that opportunity to kind of just talk about stuff. And I was interested to, I've been an IEM convert for a while. So it was just good to kind of hear, I do hear plenty of the counter argument for IEM, and there's plenty of legitimate discourse that takes place. So yeah, it was good. It was a good conversation. Yeah, that was probably the last time we were on one or another's podcast. One or the other. One another's. Yeah, sure.
A little while. Yeah. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today. Funny enough, I made this offhanded comment about, it was in jest, like it was a joke about soda, like there was not enough coffee.
Oh yeah.
And that's the number one comment I got back was like, hey, like, thanks for calling that out. We're going to try to make that change. And I was like,
the soda people have a strong presence at IEM. You're influencing an entire, do we have to change how we do this? There wasn't enough soda, which is hilarious because I don't drink soda. So I think there's too much soda. Yeah. More beer.
Actually, it probably is. Yeah. Water's probably better for the soul.
Yeah.
Yeah, but some guy's going to pop a Coke next year, and they're going to be like, thank you so much.
One for me and one for my homie, John Scardina.
Yeah, pour a Coke for John Scardina.
Did you, was that it? We're done? All right. Hey, it's been a great episode.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you for the next one. All right, 2023 is a great time. You actually, I was calling it goal setting. You had probably the better word for the new year for it. EM.
Oh my gosh, resolutions. Yes, resolutions. I was like, evolutions. Yeah, resolutions. Like trying to resolve myself to some stuff, not just emergency management, but I think like professionally and personally. I feel like the last few years I've not really set goals because it's just like there's so much uncertainty that it's like you either give up so fast because you're like, I can't do this. Like there's these things I want to go do, but because of COVID or whatever, like they don't get done. And it's like, can be really disheartening to like set a goal and like fail at it. And I was like, that's dumb. Like, I'm very much a person who's like a fan of incrementalism, right? So like, if you can't achieve what you're trying to, like, chip away at it, right? Like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So, so this year I was like, you know what? I think it's going to be important to set some goals, kind of using the smart approach to that, the like, have a time frame, it's measurable, achievable, just like something that you can actually specific, measurable, achievable. What's the R in that?
Oh my gosh. Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic.
Yeah, and then is it like timeline? Yeah. So trying to like get something that like there is there's some like goal to it, because there's also like that little like dopamine hit when you accomplish something, right? And I think we've had like just such a crazy. So I think I've been a part of the company now for like officially full time like 5-6 months, I think about. And it's been like there's so much stuff that's like in flux, like because we're just like always like working on the next thing, that like sometimes you don't take a second to celebrate like the victory. So like trying to be even just in that sense, like okay, like we did Atlanta, we did Orlando, we were in Philadelphia, like take a moment and like celebrate stuff like that, like just being more reflective as well. But I'm also ready to move on to 2023 and like do new stuff. So
yeah, it's like what's that that famous interview with Kobe Bryant? You won 2 games. Why aren't you smiling? Was there to smile about? Have we won yet? I feel like now that 2022 is in the past, like I think we won. Like I feel like it was a really, really tough year. I talked about that a little bit on the last episode.
yeah,
Like some of the challenges and all the things that were happening. I talked about finding a win even while some things are not going well. You have to be strategic enough to think about the other things. And like in the midst of everything last year, we launched basically a podcast network. We brought you on, which is a huge win. We brought some other people on too. We did Atlanta, we did Orlando, we did all this really crazy stuff.
Instinct
Ready, like yeah, and
all this
love
cool
those
stuff,
guys.
yeah.
Like Jason Martin, out of Instinct Ready /
shout out to Jason Martin, the super fan of the Readiness Network, Readiness Lab Network.
I feel like it behooves us to say Jason Martin on every episode.
I think so. Yeah.
Just to say thank you to that guy. But there's so much going on. But last year was like the chaos year.
Yeah.
And this year, in terms of like goal setting for myself, it's all about creating. I don't know if stability is the right word.
It is 100% it's stability. I was going to say sustainability. So that like, but it's sustainability and stability are probably like hand in hand, right? Like you can't be sustainable without some stability, and you really can't be stable without sustaining something, right? Like they kind of feed into each other.
Like the only thing that was constant last year was chaos.
Oh my God. Yeah. I still, people don't like, at some point we should do the discussion of what really happened in Orlando, like what it took to get Orlando to happen, because that was like, I mean, we talked about it to a degree, but like that, like just to pull off something like that with like, we're a small team that really is doing that on top of like all of the other stuff that happens. So like when you're trying to run an event that was, essentially 5 days, really, 3 days of the full event, plus all of the setup and then breakdown, on top of running. Yeah. And then on top of doing all the other stuff that we still have to do, like we're still like, managing projects across the, portfolio. I mean, it was like it was a test of resilience. We don't have to go through the whole thing again, but like just that stuff, like surviving 2022, people getting sick, families, like we all have families, like we're constantly dealing with like sick kids, and just trying to like just push and push and push. And then like this year having that goal of like, let's try to set a good foundation so that the rest of the year, which a good foundation requires like some goal setting and stuff. Like if you have stuff that you're aiming for, that makes it a lot easier than like, because like people were sort of asking us to do things and we're like, okay, let's do it. But it's like outside of our control because it's not stuff that we necessarily, we wanted to do them obviously, but like we didn't really sort of prompt it. So like we had to sort of, it was like a group project. We had to like come into this and build it while it was moving versus like this year we have a, you know, sort of some stuff we want to work on.
Well, let's talk about that
Sure.
actually a little bit because as you know, whoever your boss was, man, was just pushing things beyond the limits so many times. The reality is like we could have gone a little bit slower and not accomplished so much and not have pushed beyond, you know, our small team of what we should have done, or what we could have done, which is what we did do, was we need to identify the puzzle pieces. We need to build the puzzle pieces, and we need to be able to capitalize on that. And so all last year was the first half of the year, first 9 months of the year, to be honest, was overcoming a difficult situation that happened from January.
Yeah.
September happens, things are starting to come together. We're still having to work through a lot of different puzzle pieces or building those puzzle pieces. Now for 2023, this is why I didn't know if, I mean, technically, yes, like sustainability is probably the word here, but the word that I'm thinking of is capitalize. Now that we have all the puzzle pieces, now we need to capitalize on these puzzle pieces. We don't need more puzzle pieces. And I think part of the relating this to emergency management world, when somebody says, tell me what emergency management is, part of the reason why it is difficult for people is because we don't have standardization. The other part of it is because we do so many things, and COVID showed that it can only expand.
Yeah, it's Mission Creepville.
Mission Creepville. I live in Mission Creepville.
Yeah.
I think it is okay to finally start saying, even as an industry, look, that's not our lane. Like sometimes it's like, hey, that's not my job is kind of like the worst thing that happens in construction. But sometimes for the sake of sustainability and be able to do something proficiently and do something very well, you have to say, hey, this is my scope of work and not expand.
Yeah, I think emergency managers suck at that. I think we suck at that. Because why do you get into this job because you want to solve problems? Like ultimately, like whatever definition you want to use, whatever training, experience, knowledge you have, at the end of the day, like our job is to fit the square peg into the round hole. Like it's to find like the impossible solution and make it happen. And that's usually done through project management, like mostly, and like network building and communicating. Like those are sort of like the three pillars of emergency management in my mind, because everything that comes like collaboration and coordination is just those three things, right? It's networking, it's all that stuff that's just kind of makes us emergency managers. But what we're ultimately trying to do is like fix something. And so when we see a problem, it's really hard to sit there and know that if you say no, no one else is going to fix that problem. And I've run into it so many times. Like professionally, it's stupid. You burn yourself out. That's what happened at my last full-time emergency management gig. I said yes to everything because I was like, yeah, I don't know how to build a dispatch center, but they need one, so I'm going to do it because no one else has that skill set. And like I'm going to take on this project that is like outside. Like I know I don't have bandwidth to literally run an event plan for every single major event, that we have because I'm an office of one, or do this or do that. And so I think it's really hard not to, but so that also could get the other way to swing this is that like we fully lean into it and acknowledge that that's who we are, and then just say like that's our job and we need resources to do it, and if we don't do it then nothing else is going to get done. And that's not to say like other agencies and public safety entities can't do it, or government, whatever, but I think that's what ends up happening is a lot of times we just say yes. So I have to like figure out what that like safe ground is, or like the middle ground, I guess, to do that. And I think that's what we've been sort of pounding our head against the wall for the last like month, trying to come up with our like strategic and tactical goals for the next year is like, what do we say no to? And then how do we like embrace the things we're really good at, which I think every emergency manager probably should do at the start of the year.
Yeah.
And then like building out like even long-term, like once you have that, then you could start to look long-term. Like if you're always tactically in the sort of like tactical, like putting fire out mode, you can't get anything done. So like we were able to pause towards the end of the year and actually start to do some strategy. And it like was like, oh, it's like a relief valve, you know?
Yeah, it makes you wonder too if like just because like the nature of who we are, it's also really hard to stop mid-project.
Yeah.
Once I start, I have to I have to finish that project. I want to see it to its completion, and I feel like an utter failure if I don't.
See, I think
like
for me, it's like
culturally, it's difficult for me to like.
I did like a personality test for like it was professional development for my military life. And one of the things that came out of it was if something seems like it's not going to achieve anything fruitful or I personally just find it kind of dumb, I have absolutely no problem abandoning it I'm like, done. Do not care. Like it's dead to me. I'm moving on. So I think like, there's different, of the emergency managers that I've met in my life, there's like almost two kinds. There's like the ones that are like, they're so either mission driven or like task oriented, like that they have to complete it. And that gives them like the hit. And then there's like the schlubs like me that just like come in and we're like, that's a bad idea. Do it this way. Peace out, ops life, and you're like, what just happened here? Like
snowboarding.
That guy just came in and screwed up everything. And they're like, well, it's actually not a terrible idea, but we're already in this process. Like, why don't we keep completing it? And yeah, that's an interesting dynamic. We're way off track already in this podcast as I knew it was going to happen, but yeah, I that was another thing. Like I think in coming into this year is trying to, I think every year I have to like refresh myself on like who I am. And I think you should do this within your team as well. So like figure out sort of like the, yeah.
There you go.
The more you know, trying to, take stock of who you have in your team, who you're like missing. My old boss at the university was extremely, extremely detail oriented. And I am like the complete opposite of that. So like when we're like, because we recognize that at first it was like this very like, it was friction, right? Just caused friction all the time. Because I'm like, why are you so in the weeds on this? This is such a waste of time. It makes no sense. And then he's like, well, because this is how it's always been done. This is how I've done it for the last, like umpteen years. Like, this is my process. Like, don't screw up my process. And then there was like a moment where we're like, oh, you do it this way. I do it this way. Why are we fighting this? Like, that's fine. Like, you are the one who's going to like make sure that stuff is, fully vetted and is going to sort of function as it needs to. But you're not the person who's like going to get this like aha spur of the moment creative thought to like come up with something that's completely outside of like our normal practice or something, or that's like, so it was like, okay, cool. So that's how we need to work then. Like when we run into an issue, I'm going to come up with a bunch of stuff. You're going to shoot down the things that are stupid. We're going to find this like perfect, sort of meeting in the middle here. And then that's what will resolve. And once we sort of got used to that, it worked really, really, really well. And then I had to work, and that's not to say I was like, I'm just not going to do details, or I'm not going to see things through. Like that's something I had to work on, and I continue to work on because I know it's a weakness. And then he also had to basically like throw in the towel sometimes. And I'm like, no, we're doing it this way. Like, I understand like you're in this process, but like, that's dumb. We're not doing that. Like, I don't care. Like, we have to do it a different way. And so I'm not giving anyone an out for being having a crappy personality or a crappy approach to it. Like, sometimes you have to acknowledge like your weaknesses and solve that. But, yeah, I think recognizing, at the beginning of the year, just taking stock again of like what works, what doesn't work, and where do we need to improve across the board is like just a good practice.
So in terms of your EM career, what works, what doesn't work for you?
So it's funny. When I first started, I thought I would hate planning because it's got so many detail-oriented people in it. Like people who are attracted to planning tend to be people who are like really
Hello.
people like John. No. And I was like, oh man, I don't know if I could like even like sort of mix with this crowd. But then I also found like planning gave me some stability because my brain is just like bouncing off the walls all the time, that like it's really hard for me sometimes to like even like stop and like think about a situation. And so like I really started to enjoy planning because I was like, oh, I can actually set some guardrails and like still be the person that I am, but like plan to a point where I can then start to wing it. I'm very comfortable winging it. Like that's one thing, like I don't like, I have absolutely, some people are so afraid of like, no, I have to have something in place before I like, give me the tools I need to like get this project done. And I'm like, whatever. I've got like a, half a stick of gum, a rubber band and a razor blade, and I will fix whatever it is that you're trying to do. But that also means like a lot of times you're getting like kind of crappy solutions. Like they're the best solutions for what you have because there's nothing going on, but it's not really a great solution. So I've actually started to evolve towards like really enjoying planning. And then when I joined the USAR team, the team chief was like, yeah, I'm putting you in planning. And I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. I guess that makes sense. Emergency manager. And I was like, oh man, I don't know if is this going to work with me? And then I was like, actually, I love this because like planning drives a lot of the, the strategy, and the decisions and planning can actually drive a lot of the tactics. So I get to take like my tactical brain and think like, well, if I was out in the field, what would I need to do? Like, what would make my life easier instead of being out there and going, oh, now I got to figure this out. So that was something that like over the last couple of years, I've really figured out. And I think in the last year, I've found it to be helpful, particularly in like the stuff that we ran into where like stuff didn't go well. Like it took me a second to sort of, I did realize like I also need to like pause and like step back from stuff sometimes and like get the big picture. Like that was definitely the Orlando situation, like really spun me up. And, but then I was like, what's the deal? Like, this is like, you have the solution, like just figure it out. Like it'll be fine, and lean into that. Where I was like, okay, we had the plans. It was going really well. I was doing the planning thing. And then when the plans failed, which is the whole point of this, right? Like you do your plans to get you to a point where you don't have plans. And now you have to think, a little bit more creatively. And it worked. And I was like, okay, well, that's a good thing. So like, I need to like work on that more sort of like professionally as an emergency manager.
So speaking of Orlando, this is going to be a part of the conversation where people might be like, what? Because we had all the challenges, I wouldn't say because, that's not the right word. With all the challenges, are you glad that we did Orlando? Like, you know what I'm trying to say by that?
So my give up on stupid ideas part of my brain was like, punch out. Like this is not what we wanted to do. Let's get out of here. And I think that's where that side of my personality was like really like screaming at me. Like, we don't have to do this. This is not a thing that has to be done. Huh?
It wasn't just screaming at you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I think we all probably certainly came to that conclusion, but like, to me, like, that's just like where I was like, this isn't working. Like, let's find a different solution versus like, oh, this isn't working. Let's find a different solution. And so once we were there and it was working, right up until I absolutely ravaged my voice into like a bloody mess, and couldn't speak for about a week, which, my wife appreciated that. Once we were there and things went like, even though they were not what we had hoped it would be, and it was not what we originally envisioned, I was like, oh, this is happening and it's going really well and people are enjoying it and they're getting stuff out of this. And that's the point of emergency management, is like we are getting through it regardless of what happened. Now, again, it's not a real emergency. I would have loved to have had our ideal scenario work out, or to pause and step back and try to like build the beautiful vision that we had. But I think that is also like that's like my ego more than anything, is like, well, if it's not what I promised someone, then is it like what it's supposed to be? And then it was like, oh, that's not actually what we promised people. Like what we promised people was this really important experience where they're going to like get a bunch of stuff out of this. And then we kind of built everything on like not on the fly, like we built everything up to make it work. And then it worked really well. And there was stuff there that like, honestly, we didn't know was going to work really well because we hadn't done it before. And it happened. And now it's like, this is actually probably better than Atlanta in a lot of ways, because we had things there that because of the sort of initial challenges that we had to come up with. And when we did the sort of after action, like some of the stuff that we thought was going to be the biggest challenge was actually like what kind of made it the biggest strength and made it more realistic and everything. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's like had I been given an out, I probably would have taken it.
Yes.
But because we didn't have that, or you didn't let us do that, then
Bingo.
you know, it was like, all right, like it took me probably 24 hours to sort of like step back and sort of like figure out like, okay, what can we possibly do to like make this happen? Because this was like weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks.
It was about 2 weeks.
Total venue change, yeah. So, but it all worked out, and you know, it was one of those, definitely a personal lesson, and I think it was if we were to write a full after action, you could have applied it to like almost any sort of disaster scenario. Like
it was as close to a responding to a disaster as I've seen it.
Yeah.
Here's my takeaway on Orlando, and you're gonna think this is really messed up, probably. When I said I don't like the idea of not being able to complete something once I start, it wasn't because I don't find things mundane, and then if they're mundane or stupid, I back out. Is if I'm excited about something, that is when it's nearly impossible. There's always I mean, you always have to put the asterisk there, of course, but it is nearly impossible to get me to stop. Either somebody has to absolutely prove to me that it is wrong, or I will complete the task.
Yeah.
And that's not to say like I have learned. You're talking about. This is all building up to this. Talking about personality types. I've taken a personality test a couple different times, and I've learned that personality tests are probably BS. But I've taken the same one a couple different times over the course of years. In my undergrad and my master's, I had to take the same one for different
like
classes.
Myers-Briggs or something.
Yeah, it's the 16 personalities test.
Yeah.
And I get the same one every time. And the character that it says I'm most like is Jack Sparrow. Now, you can say that's either a really bad thing or a really good thing, but it's true. Like, I'm an innovator on the fly. I'm a lot like you in the fact that, like, I have absolutely no problem winging things. People who listen to the show are like, yeah, definitely, I can tell. The show's all over the place. But, like, I can give speeches, I can get up there and just go. And I think that makes me a really good emergency manager in a disaster when the plan's not working. It's just like, find a way. The Orlando experience, if I knew what I knew now, would I do Orlando? No. But in the process of doing Orlando and working with somebody that I just had hired only a couple months ago, and one of my staff members who was in a new role and a really small team, I was secretly very excited because I knew a couple things that were going to happen. One, we already had the content. Like for all the logistical things that we had to come up with the fly, the content was still there. And so from the student perspective, I knew we were going to get really good feedback from the student. I had 100% confidence in that. So I knew that was going to happen. Because another person on our staff was overwhelmed and beat up and tired before Atlanta. And at the end of the first day, they were just over the moon. They could not believe how great it was. And so I knew the same thing was going to happen to you. So that was one. The other thing is there's almost nothing better than going through the trenches together. And I know this might sound a little bit manipulative or whatever, but I knew that if we could fight through it and we could find a win through this, and this year was the stability year, then we can say we did this really hard thing in Orlando. And so if smaller problems popped up, then we can get through it. If we had given up in Orlando, if we didn't do it, if we didn't overcome the logistical problems, I I had the thought that I was like, there will be no overcoming this. Like we won't be able to overcome this as a team,
Yeah.
or do hard things. So now that we know we can do hard things, we should appreciate when things are not that hard.
Yeah.
And I think there is some to that.
Yeah.
The other
I
part of
agree.
it was we can never forget that the content that we came up with is based off of real world experiences from all the people who participate. We have world class instructors. And when you have those elements together, it's nearly impossible for an emergency manager to walk into a room to not see really great content, to hear like literally the best person in the world talking about this and think this sucks.
Yeah, I think the students also like one thing that I've realized now is also having emergency management students like who are used to adapting on the fly as well. I think also helps. I think our non-emergency management students were like, I mean, they were just completely caught in the headlights anyways. Because they're like, oh my God, this is what you guys do. But
That was awesome, actually.
everyone was like pretty amicable to decisions that we made. Like there was like some pushback on certain things where,
The chairs.
which is just, I mean, like, again, like those are things that like, oh my God, like work in a real no kidding disaster. And you're like, who cares what you're sitting? Like, obviously we want to like make the experiences awesome every single time. Like we try to improve it, make it better. So all those lessons, like things that people tell us, we're taking into account and trying to like fix all that. And honestly, like most of the time that we get feedback that's sort of like negatively tilted, it's like comfort level things that like are, it's like, yes, if that's all we have to improve is make like a slightly more cushy chair available or something, that's awesome. Because that means like everything else are like, yeah, the content was great, learned tons, really pumped up, can't wait to bring this back, and I want to do more of this stuff. And so we, again, having had a really important, like this just beautiful vision of what we were going to accomplish, and then like having to figure that out again 2 weeks later in a different venue and making it work was awesome. But I also think we owe a lot to the students of just being like, cool, like we're going to also grin and bear it and get through that. And that's not necessarily the intent of the program. But I think that's going to happen. I mean, it happens even at like the IEM conference, for instance. One year I went and there was a hurricane that went through. I didn't have a room the first day. Like my room had flooded out, and I was like, I'll sleep on the floor if I have to. Like I'm here at this point. I'm not going home. So like we'll make it work. And so like just being that adaptable person, no matter what in your career, in your life, in your experiences, especially for emergency managers. Like I imagine if like we're going to have a party right now in that field, and they're going to be like, all right, well, I see some like leftover timber over there. I'm going to go start that a fire so it's nice and warm. And I've got a bunch of like, burgers in the freezer. Like I'll take those out. Like you don't have to like sit there and like overthink anything. Like they just sort of like get into motion. And I think that's like what we did is we were just like, all right, once we finally like kind of like stopped and we're like, we have to do this, then it's like, just do it. Like just do it and get it over with. It might have been more of a challenge because we didn't have Ashley there, who is the person who like can see things through when, that isn't happening. Like John and I just constantly getting creative can cause lots of problems actually sometimes. And so we were definitely missing Ashley on that, but we had Rachel also, who's a very good detailer person. She kind of oriented us a few times. We had the Instinct Ready team there. That are just kind of good at like managing logistics. So like that was a huge help. It was like a microcosm for like everything else in the year, right? Like the last like 3 years. So speaking of like sustainability and like stability is also like maybe we're fine. Well, I don't know. I thought we were actually through COVID. This year has been a nightmare around here with COVID, flu, and RSV and stuff. But like moving on to that next thing, like, for maybe finally after 3 years of this is like, trying to get that stability and like move on from like the things that don't go well. I tend to dwell on stuff that like doesn't go exactly how I wanted it to, even though like I don't plan stuff. So like you kind of set yourself up for failure a lot of times. But
Me too.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I want to like, I don't know, like coming out of that, I was like, all right, like I can move on from this. We did it. And now it's like less ominous in the future. Like we've been through it. So like, lessons learned, AAR is done. Like we're ready to be better every single time. And that was only the second one that we did also. Like we had to caveat that a few times. Like, like we can only plan and prepare for so much, but if like a venue collapses the 2 weeks beforehand, then like there's nothing we can do about that, at this point. So
I'm going to screw this up, but there's like a phrase that basically says like, I lived through yesterday and I'm smiling today, so I know I can smile tomorrow.
yeah.
And I think a lot of emergency managers, like fatigue is real.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to do a special episode here later in this year talking about fatigue and how to overcome like response fatigue, emergency management fatigue, and it'll be a powerful episode with that guest. But the reality is like there's so many good things happening, and we need to find wins. And so maybe for this last segment, because we talked a lot about if anything, for
we really haven't even talked about going forward either. We're still doing like the recap.
That's fine. It's 2 episodes. If somebody's really listening to this episode, and if they know what's going on, you just had Zach. This is for listeners, right? You just had Zach talking about almost from like a staff perspective of like how to operate when things aren't going to plan, and you just heard some of my thoughts of like the leadership qualities it takes to have a vision when literally everyone around you could be saying stop. And sometimes you do need to stop and take inventory if it's a personal issue, but sometimes when it's a vision for work, to be able to say I believe in this mission and I believe in the team enough, even when they are exhausted and may not believe in themselves. And I think those are really phenomenal lessons to learn. Something that I'm still learning, quote unquote, as a leader. I want to get better at that. I want to get better at motivating people in ways that excite them. There's a book about 17 different leadership styles, and somebody can look into that if they want. But for the sake of like not talking about leadership ad nauseum, there's an opportunity for everybody to, in their career, to motivate themselves and to other people to get the job done. And we had a job in Orlando that had to get done. We have a lot of things that need to get done this year that we're excited about. As listeners of this podcast, our job on both of our shows and across the network is to create content for you guys that you want to listen to. And so, we have an opportunity to do that quite a bit. So my question really is now Zach has EM Weekly Zach.
Yeah.
And not so much Doberman Zach is, instead of setting goals and creating sustainability as an emergency manager, what are you going to focus on? You specifically, and really as the field, like what do we need to do in 2023 to like have smiling days, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I got 5 things that I had thought about before we started recording. I actually started thinking about this last week. One is I want to get back into the field some more. So last year was a lot of like administrative stuff, like, training and exercising, which we're out there, we're doing the thing. But I also like, the year before I was on the COVID mission for 5 months. And so I was like every day, different locations. It was the mission. It was fun. It was like, oh yeah, I've got sort of that purpose again that got me recharged. That's sort of like what kind of got me back into from like, I was doing Intel analyst stuff. And then I was like, I want to go back into emergency management. I really like this stuff. So and I'm not saying like necessarily deploy to, a Hurricane Ian level event. It could be, what I'm really hoping to do is actually do more stuff in my community and just help them with their emergency management stuff. But just get out from behind the desk. I think a lot of emergency managers really struggle to just get out from behind the desk. We all sit here and we go, we don't have a mission, or like no one's calling me. Every single incident in your community, every single event in your community, you can support it as a volunteer, as a part-timer, whatever you want to do, even in your professional goal. If you're a professional emergency manager, because I hear a lot of emergency managers who are like, I just kind of do plans and then nothing else happens. Is there a house fire in your community? I guarantee like every single town has a fire at some point, and that requires mass care. It requires logistics. It requires resource management. You can do that stuff. It doesn't have to be a hurricane that gets you out from behind your desk. So I'm a huge advocate for just get out and do it. So I'm going to do that because I didn't do enough of that last year. And it's like flexing that muscle, right? You don't want your the stuff to atrophy. The next thing is like push the button. And this is probably more of like for other people, like we've talked to so many people this year about like just mass notification, how they like buy these systems and they're like, this is great. We got all this technology, and they like won't use it because they're so afraid of like what it could do or breaking it or not using it properly. So like I'm talking about this in like the literal sense. Like if you have mass notification, use your mass notification software. You want to use it when it's sunny out, not when it's the worst stuff is happening. Get proficient, do that. But like push the button, like go do like if you're thinking about it, or you've got a piece of software, if you've got something you want to try, like go do it. Push the button. Personally, I want to do more creative stuff. I think part of the way my brain works is if I like don't get to like just pause and sort of like make stuff or do stuff. Like the podcast does that to a degree. I've started like doing drawing. I used to do a lot of video editing. I've done like I want to do video game stuff. Like I just want to go do stuff. I might do stand up again. I haven't done stand up in like many years, but I did stand up for like 2 or 3 years, and it was really fun. And so I want to do that again, do some comedy.
Would you like to hear my favorite joke?
Yeah.
A magician was driving down a road, then he turned into a driveway.
All right, so John, maybe stick to like what like you're good at.
I will. I have this. It's a terrible joke.
There was a hand gesture, like a razzle dazzle hand gesture for those who are listening and didn't get to see the visual.
That joke, I've said to. It's such a terrible joke. It's not really funny at all. But every time my wife gets mad at me, I say that same joke to my wife, and she's just like it's the. I don't know. It's like saying I love you when she's mad at me. Like I just start telling her I love her. John, why did you? I love you. I love you. So it's the same thing. I say
diffusing.
That
yeah, you just diffuse the situation.
So if you're getting yelled at by somebody, try saying that joke.
All right. I'll throw this out there as a huge professional development goal for people out there. Take a stand-up comedy, a improv course, a singing class, something that gets you into a very uncomfortable situation, especially public speaking, because that is your job, whether you like to acknowledge it or not. As an emergency manager, you are a public speaker. You are a outreach person. Yeah. Take those courses, do it. It'll be the best thing you'll do professionally your entire career. Like I've done a billion different ICS courses. I've done tons of exercises. I would say the Vermont Comedy Club intro to comedy class has done more for me professionally than anything else that I've done, because I realized like comedy can get you out of a lot of bad situations. People remember things that are funny. So all my exercises, like hopefully people in Orlando and Atlanta appreciated that I inject humor into everything. And it also like you think on your feet. So that's one of the reasons I want to do more creative stuff, is like, it actually does help you professionally. It also is like good to just like step back sometimes and like just doodle, like just, that's how your brain works. Like you have to just like take a second and think about stuff. And I did not do enough of that last year. I think that was part of the reason like I got so hung up on the Orlando situation it was like charge forward, charge forward, charge forward, charge forward. And it's like, wait, no, that's stupid. Like that gets you killed in war, right? Like if you're not really thoughtful in what you're doing, you're just going to get blown up. You're going to walk into the like the tripwire. So like I had to stop for a second and like look around, and in that time, like, you know, that's when all of a sudden your brain's like, oh, I have a moment to like think and be creative. And then it's like, oh, in that situation, it was like, here's the solution we've been looking for that I've been struggling with for the last like 48 hours.
Well, you're talking about being creative, and I don't mean to cut you off.
No, of course.
But it is actually pretty amazing. Like taking a break and like doing something creative. My kids are 3 and 2.
Yeah.
And we'll sit there and we'll play with dinosaurs. And my son will say, like, what's the name of the scary dinosaurs? I'm like, oh, that's the carnivores. You know, just like thinking,
Yeah.
what's the name of the weak dinosaurs? Oh, that's the herbivores. What's the name of the nice dinosaurs? Oh, that's the porfivores.
Jesus. Yeah. Anyways.
Oh, that was good.
Yeah. James Podlucky has been posting a lot. So he's been on your podcast. He's like one of my like emergency management confidants now. Really good dude. Works for Everbridge.
Talked about him in the last episode.
Yeah, we've done a lot of cool stuff with him. And one of the things that he started posting, so he just had his a baby, and he's like, oh, like unplugging for a little bit and like going for a walk and playing with my kids like is actually way better for my mental health and my ability to work than trying to just like plow through things. And like, even, you know, one of the lucky things that we can do is work from home. Like we're both very fortunate. And during COVID, it was awesome. Like I've spent more time with my kids than I think like I did with my parents growing up, like for my entire like childhood, because we were all home and together and like had to like do stuff. But like, even then, like I have gotten into this mindset sometimes where like, I feel like I can't get up from my desk, and like, it can be really liberating to walk to the end of my road to get my mail, or to like run into town real fast. Like I'm not talking like disappearing for hours, like 20 minutes, 15 minutes, and go get a coffee somewhere. And just like, you step away from your desk and you're like, oh, I'm not a like prisoner here. Like I'm here because I want to be here and I want to do this. So like, you know, taking those little moments to like step back and like just don't think about what you're thinking about. That's when all of a sudden you have these like epiphanies and these like aha moments.
Okay. Steve Johnson. Steve Johnson is a professor. He is the head of Seaburn for the British Army, and he's a police officer. And I asked him, I said, okay, like one, like, how do you juggle all that? And he said, honestly, like, I love all 3 of them, but I can't do them all the time. If I do like one for a little while, then I get really, really good at that just by taking a break and going back and just challenging your brain in different ways. And I think that is one of the wisest counsels anyone could ever give. You just gave it. Steve Johnson's giving it. Stepping away and doing something. It's amazing how much more actually proficient you can be at doing the job by not doing it all the time. Funny.
Yeah, because you'll grow to like resent it. I don't know how people do the same job for like 30 years. Like I know so many of like the previous generation, like my grandparents are like, oh yeah, I stayed in one place forever. And of course it was pension, which we don't have basically anymore. It's essentially gone.
You're not going to get a Doberman.
Yeah. But like I also need that variety. And I have to sometimes, like, it gets very expensive. Like I go into a hobby and I'll do it for like 6 months and then I kind of move on. I've got there's actually an aviation headset back here from when I was doing my flight lessons a couple of years ago that I like haven't finished. You know, like sometimes you do have to just kind of like go do something for a little bit, get it out of your system. And like you said, it flexes your brain in a different way. It's just like exercising, right? Like if you do the same exercise over and over and over, you're only going to like work those muscles, and like it can actually start to affect other parts of your system. Like doing the sort of like mixing stuff up and like trying different things is better for you mentally, physically. So yeah, no, I totally agree with that. In line with this, also reading more. I want to do more reading. I've actually started reading more. I read nothing but like military history and like disaster books and just like constant nonfiction. And I started reading more fiction. And that like escape has been really, really nice, especially with everything that's going on. And like, you can look at like storytelling historically, like part of it is like to give you that escape so that you can think of, be aspirational and inspired and like, do other stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to like do more of that's something like, I don't know. I was always I was a nerd. Like I read textbooks. Like I would buy a textbook that I was not in a course. I would buy a textbook and read it. And so like, that's just not a great, like that doesn't help you be creative. It's like, you can learn lots of stuff. That's great. But like, I was like, I need to like read stuff that's like outside of my comfort zone. So I've been trying to do a lot more of that.
I'm just gonna keep pairing off of this and like showing like why, like for our listeners' sake, like what you're saying like is so impactful. This specific one in particular, emergency managers sometimes don't realize how incredibly boring they sound to their stakeholders. If all you're doing every single time you're going and talking to the director of a hospital or about, even the government agency is about the looming disasters, you sound awful. You know what though? If they have a book on their table and it's Lord of the Rings and you're talking about how, you're Minas Tirith and it's lightning and it's in fasting and how J.R. Tolkien puts, wordplay together and what like the just having a conversation about something else besides the job, they will actually want to talk to you. Part of the reason why going back to kind of Orlando and some of the trainings that we do is like that we do like social events. One is we want to build a camaraderie, but two is like to do something else that just shows people that they have a personality. Top golf, great equalizer. Everybody sucks at it. So it's like another example is and I've shared this a couple times, like I built an augmented reality sandbox. One is really cool to do that, but two, it was just like showing that like we had other talents. You want to be interesting to the people around you, and if you are not interesting, if you don't have any hobbies or talents or whatever to explore outside of your job, people will only look at you for the job. And if it's not in gray sky, then they might try to avoid you.
Yeah.
So just being an interesting person, you talked about stand-up comedy. That's a fantastic option. I've given public speeches like my whole life because I go to church. That's helped me out quite a bit. Like whatever your thing is, do something more than just the job. I'm passionate about the job. You're passionate about the job. But having hobbies is fantastic.
Well, I mean, think about everyone that's like those people in your lives that you're like just like magnetically attracted to. It's almost always because they're good storytellers, right? Like they know how to engage people. They're charismatic. Like that is something emergency managers can struggle with because we deal with like dark things. Like we deal with things that people don't want to think about. In fact, oh God, who was I talking to about this? I was talking to someone, maybe it was you, John. I don't remember, but they were telling someone about like what they do. And the person just being like, no, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to know. Like this is not something I'm comfortable with. Like I don't want to think about disasters. I don't want to think about this. It was one of my friends. I was talking about like just trying to, communicate sometimes like preparedness. They're like, oh yeah, we were talking about like the coming storm or whatever. And they were like, I don't want to even hear about it. Like I'm afraid of the wind. I'm going to lose power and all my stuff is going to get destroyed. I don't even want to think about it. And that a lot of that is like how we communicate that message. And I think emergency managers and the government struggle to communicate because they think they have to be like this prim and proper or like very explicit sometimes in like directions versus like, that's fine. That stuff is important. Give really good information. But like, there's also a component of like storytelling and like engagement and charisma that is really important. And you can see this in like different presidents that we've had. You can see this in different leaders that you've followed. Like people that are charismatic, you're like, okay, like I get it. Like they're relieving some stress out of me. Like there's something that I could like. You can follow them. Like your approach to just Orlando, just being like, relax. Like we're gonna figure it out. Like just don't stress over it. Just try to figure out what we could do. And it's like, okay, I have permission to fail here. Like that's important. And, like now I can sort of like take a second and like think about this versus if you were like, get this done. I don't care what has to be done. Get it done. If you had done that, I would have been like pound sand, I quit. Like, I don't want to do this,
Yeah.
and it's
Good
that
tension.
approach is really, really important. Not just the interpersonal stuff with like a business, but like how you're communicating to your constituents. And you can see when they fail, man. You want to see a emergency manager get hung out to dry. It's because they either have an ego or they can't communicate, or like just that ability. You can win a situation so fast by just being a good, storyteller, and being like, if someone comes at you with like, hey, you screwed up really bad, you can be like, no, we didn't. Like, we did everything right. Versus like, we have to acknowledge like things maybe didn't go the way we wanted to. Here's why, explaining a situation, like being able to sort of provide context and stuff in ways that like people aren't going to get otherwise. Like that, I think is just like, if anything you're working on this year, like it's just be a better communicator. No matter what your job is, every single component of emergency management is communication. So,
Well, I mean, you're talking about like, gosh, Buffalo, New York, 37 plus people dying. I
yeah,
say 37 plus because I know about the 37. Somebody put on one of the social media like, oh, let the blame game begin, and they were blaming each other, and I was like, okay, first of all, it's still cold there.
yeah,
P.S. There's still a lot of snow there. People are still dead, and you still have a disaster in your hands, and it's also still a winter. So sometimes you have to be able to take it. Like,
yeah,
yeah, there is blame here, um, and we also have to remember as emergency managers, this is really hard to both say and hear, but there is still something called personal responsibility for all the travel bans. You talk about all the travel bans in California. There were people who went out and got COVID during COVID, and no one was supposed to be on there. There's a famous video of somebody in Buffalo where the cop was, through the speaker there,
oh yeah,
saying, "Hey, what are you doing? Go home." There's supposed to be we need to be able to effectively communicate, and then maybe not put every single thing that's going to happen in all caps, or saying, these dramatic words when it's not going to be dramatic. So when it is dramatic and we use the dramatic language, it actually has weight.
yeah,
And I think that comes back to being a good storyteller, having a better perspective of things, having, more talents. You're being able to go to the director or go to those constituents and saying like, "Hey, this is going to suck for a couple days, but just stay home." Versus, "Hey, this thing is called a bomb cyclone for a reason." I hate the term bomb cyclone, by the way, but hey, this is going to be really bad. So when they know, hey, they're using a different language here than what they typically use.
yeah.
But you can't have that conversation if every single time you're coming out of the gate like,
The
the
national
world's gonna end.
the National Weather Service is like sort of figuring this out now after being like this extremely, uptight bureaucratic organization. Their communication has gotten so much better. They're using more graphics, they're using more image, they're using more videos. They are letting their forecasters talk more, like getting out there. One thing that I really like to do is read the forecast and then read the forecaster's discussion. So every single National Weather Service page, if you click on it, there's a forecaster's discussion at the bottom. It's links that most people don't click on. There's so much like personality and character in there. I'm like, why is this not the forecast? Like, like there was just these discussion points. And you'll see them posted every once in a while, mostly because emergency managers and weather people read this, but you'll see a clip and you're like, that's really funny. Like there's a joke in there, or like, oh, that's so interesting. I'd never thought about that. Or like with the upcoming atmospheric river event in California, there was one that I saw posted, and I want to say, I think it was Rakesh Barina was who shared it. One of the people that I follow, and it was something like saying, like, listen, this is a once in a career event. Like you need to be like, I'm never going to see this again, and I've done this for 20 years. I'm never going to see this again. If you see that, that's like, whoa. Like if the person who's been doing this forever is like, this is different, that carries weight versus being like, yes, bombogenesis, a cyclone that's negatively tilted coming across the blah, 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 and the lows and the highs and blah, blah. That means nothing to anyone. But that thing saying like, listen, I've done this for a long time. You don't have to listen to me, but I'm telling you, this is something that's making me nervous. You're like, oh, now I'm going to pay attention. I'm leaning into this. So,
Well, we were hearing things in St. Louis, like the entire country, the northern like all these things. We had an inch of snow and it was cold.
Yeah.
And while that sucks, that is not what happened in Buffalo.
No,
And
that's
so
not even
like,
what happened in Vermont. Yeah. I mean, we got shellacked here.
yeah. And it's like, so when we were like, oh, another kind of like overblown, it's kind of a pun there, overblown situation. And then we hear about Buffalo, we're like, oh shoot, for them it was.
Yeah.
I agree with you. The National Weather Service is changing. Ken Graham was on Disaster Tough last year, and he talked about that. And he talked about the history of like the all
Stupid
caps.
stuff like the all caps thing. Yeah. I love
Yeah,
that.
it's just like it's really fascinating to hear like the director of the National Weather Service saying like, "Yeah, we need to get better at communicating with people. Use
And we
common
all know
language."
it. That's the thing that's so frustrating. Like, we all know this. We're preaching to the choir. Everyone that's listening to this knows they got to get better at public speaking. What is it that holds us back from it? I guess that's the question. Is it like they're afraid
The
to take the
embarrassment
leap?
of the process. People are embarrassed of the process.
I'm gonna give the best experience I ever had in my entire life that has caused, like, just released so much mental agony and stress from me. I don't matter. I think when I screw up that the whole world is ending. It is not. Like, when I do something embarrassing, people might talk about it for like a split second. Even if it was captured on video and it's the most viral TikTok thing on the face of the earth, it's all gone within 24 hours. And we're all so caught up in our own mindsets. We're not thinking about, so like, if you get up on stage and you bomb as a comedian, you're like, it's painful. It sucks. I never did it. But no, I'm just kidding. It sucks. But
yeah.
the truth is, like, if you get up there and you try it and you get through it, you've come out the other side. It's done. Don't worry about it. No one's going to think about this. I do embarrassing stuff around my family all the time, and it's mostly because I don't care anymore. Like, it's not that, like, swing for the fences. Do things that are outside your comfort zone. That is life. If you're not doing that, you're missing out on the most important part of your life. And it's going to help you personally. It's going to help you professionally. Go take the singing lesson. Go take the stand-up class. Go take the drawing class. Build something. I say yes to stuff. I got to be in Popular Mechanics magazine because I responded to a survey, and I was like, you know what? I really like Popular Mechanics magazine, and they sent this, and I'm going to fill it out fully. And they're like, you're going to be the first non-Popular Mechanics editor to have a section in Popular Mechanics. And I was like, that's awesome. And it was all because I was just like, say yes, like, just do it, like, and just lean into it. Who cares? What's the worst that happens? Nothing.
We've now come full circles because we started the podcast by saying, learn to say no. And now we're saying, say yes. But I think
learn to say no is like a good thing.
Yeah. I think
but also
what
saying
really
yes
matters is, like, just like to wrap this up.
Yeah.
Is like situational awareness is so important. And personal situational awareness. Maybe that's really the theme of 2023. Maybe why we talk about Orlando so much on this episode is because you need to be aware enough to be able to say no when you need to say no. And you need to be aware enough and have enough courage to say yes when you should say yes. And one reason why you shouldn't say no is because you haven't done it before.
Yeah.
Or another way to say that is like, it's okay to fail.
Yes.
And we all need to be more okay with failure. The big problem why people I think are really afraid of public speaking and doing that kind of stuff is because people get absolutely blasted.
Yeah.
But the reason why the people are getting blasted, people forget about this, is because they're saying things that are rude, hurtful, misplaced. But we're also so uptight that if we relax just a little bit, we wouldn't come off as being hurtful. We'd be coming off as more realistic and human and actually more compassionate and doing things to allowing yourself to failure. You're talking. I was laughing when you said, I don't matter, and how you had to change that mindset of like it's okay to not matter. I used to date girls in high school and college, and I would think if I break up with them, they will never find anybody else ever again. I was so narcissistic, and I was
Oh
like
my
honestly
God.
shocked and happy
Yeah.
when they would like start dating other
Wow. I
people.
can't believe.
Like,
Yeah.
oh man,
That's
they're never gonna
hysterical.
find anybody. But once I realized, I was like, dude, I'm just another guy to most people. To my wife, hopefully, I'm her world, my world. But like it's okay to like move on and try new
Yeah.
things. And so like
Laugh at
2023,
yourself. Yeah.
I'm calling it. Like 2023 needs to be the year of personal situational awareness. Take personal stock and say like, if you're really bad at something, try something new. Try to do it better. Get better at it. It's okay to fail in the process. It's a journey, and be on this journey with us on these shows. We want to get better in our shows every week. We try new things. We've tried a lot of new things in 2022, and we will keep on trying new things. I'm starting season 4. This is going to be technically season 7 of EM Weekly. And so like, enjoy this journey with us. Tell us the new things that you're willing to try. And if you have an idea for one of our podcasts that you want us to try out, let us know. And, we'll look at that and maybe we'll say yes, maybe we'll say no. We'll take that situational awareness and run with it.
Boom.
Boom.
That's it.
Boom
2023.
cyclone. End
Yeah.
of episode.